Good afternoon and welcome to Altran Education webinar, Have You Audited Your Collection Agencies? Best Practices for Auditing Your Vendors. My name is Thomas Arnold. I'm the Director of Client Services at Altran Education, and I want to welcome everyone on the webinar today. To just cover a few housekeeping items with everyone before we begin the webinar itself. ERS has provided educational webinars since 2012 on timely and informative topics, co-hosted by industry experts with a roundtable format discussion on latest industry trends. Recordings are available online of the entire webinar. The recording for this webinar will be ready to go by the end of next week on our website. As of September 1st this year, Enterprise Recovery Systems became Altran Education. All Enterprise Recovery Systems was owned and is currently a part of United Recovery Systems, which was our parent company, and they had other sister agencies to us in the healthcare and financial services industries, and it became important for all of those verticals to come together under one name. And for the past 2 years, our marketing team has been working with internal subject matter experts and stakeholders and some vendors to help rebrand and rejuvenate the organization under the new name Altran. This brings over 39 years of experience to leverage across multiple verticals. Our clients, not only in education but in government, financial services, healthcare, will benefit from the expertise across the industry. If you do have any questions today, please feel free to type them into the questions box. They will come to the team here and we can address them either during the presentation if it's topical, or we can address them at the end of the presentation. And again, as I said before, my name is Thomas Arnold. I'm the Director of Client Services here at Altran Education. I started here in 2014 and have been a part of the Client Services team. Prior to that, I spent 8 years in higher education with Kaplan University Online, working in financial aid and admissions. And today I have the pleasure of introducing Judith Flink, who will be hosting our webinar today. Judy has over 30 years of experience in senior level management positions in higher education. She has worked and served on a number of national higher education committees, including COHIO and others, and currently Judith is the Interim Assistant Controller at Rutgers University.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, everybody. This is a great and timely topic for us this afternoon. And it's my great pleasure to introduce James Bergdorf, who I had to talk a little bit into doing the webinar, but he's ready, and it's a great session. And I've known James for over 9 years. He worked with me at the University of Illinois. He was responsible for the daily management of our Springfield campus, and also the cash handling and banner accounts receivable training for departments, and then daily customer service with students. He was working on his master's degree, and the topic of auditing collection agencies was a project that he worked on for that degree. Like I said, it is very timely. It's the time of year when we should be looking at what our collection agencies are doing for us, auditing the situation, and making some assessments on, do we look for new ones? Do they keep the ones we've got? And how do we manage it? Having those conversations with them about service. So I'm going to turn it over to James right now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before I kick off, I want to definitely extend a thanks to Tom and Christy, all the Altran team, as well as Judy, who is allowing me to do this opportunity to share with what I learned along the way on this project. So what you can see on the screen here, we're going to cover a few things, how we got here, and it's really about sharing some of the reasons behind why we should be doing what we do. And we're going to share some points. I'll share some points about my initial review and the planning that went into it. Then we'll get into the audit protocol. I'll talk a little bit more about the commission review. And hopefully at the end I provide you a couple of resources. Of course, you're there for you to tweak as you need to fit your own style if this is something that you're going to do. Which again, at the end, I hope that that if some of you take away a nugget or two, that will help you determine, one, that your institution should begin some form of audit of your third-party collection agencies, and to, hopefully this will be a rough outline or at least a starting point for your team that, you can tweak it into your own process that fits your risk tolerance level for moving forward. So a little bit more about the background. Judy did mention that this idea really came about as my master's capstone project that I took to our fantastic superstar of an executive director who has since retired, and it was weird that she introduced me for this webinar. I also took it to our student loan and collections leadership and pitched the idea of the project that USFSCO needs to create and implement an expanded audit of our external agencies. And the capstone project was just the initial review that focused on student accounts as well as non-student accounts or general accounts receivables that we placed with our agencies. And my research proposition for that project, it really centered around the theory that the older accounts are in the collection process, that the harder it is, and therefore, from a creditor standpoint, perceive that as being a higher risk of violations of several of the laws that must be followed in the industry. So our objective of creating a new audit protocol was to, we want to start checking the agency's compliance with the university contract requirements. I'll cover that in a little bit. We also need to check the agency's compliance with federal and state collection laws. And plus, by getting this first one, this initial audit, it definitely provides a foundation for future audits. We had come out of it with several recommendations going forward, such as ongoing monitoring of complaints, which I'll show you later that we came out with one recommendation, and since we've already changed, which is also part of the process of setting up an audit for the first time. And also, we're going to alternate annually what loans or what accounts we focus on. So our initial one last year, we focused on the accounts receivables. And this coming up here, I'll be kicking that off actually first part of November. Oh, I just gave away the secret to our vendors listening. But we're also going to focus on the student loans. So that way we're always staying in touch with our vendors, but we're taking a different bucket each year to monitor those things that we're looking for. And of course, one of the other things that came out of this is not that we found a problem, but we also added as a recommendation, because it's a perceived risk that came out during this initial process, is that we should be taking a closer look at our commission invoices and how they're placed in first, second, and third, or litigation status, because typically each one of those levels has a different rate. So we want to match up what are they charging, look at the payments and follow it through. And again, I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through this. So our initial audit concluded with a very few findings, okay, very few immaterial findings on top of that. So the things I did discover were like verbiage missing on certificate of insurance that actually was out there since the initial RFP for collection agency contract. Or maybe I had outdated state level certificate and licensing. It's something that was initially asked for and received during the process, so we wanted to follow up on that to make sure that if there were states and agencies or state requirements on the agencies that we did keep them in check, make sure that they're operating effectively or correctly in all the states that they're doing business. So before we continue and move forward, I think we'll kick off with Judy may have a question for this team, this group today.
So our first poll is, do you currently audit your collection agency? It'll be about 30 seconds to chime in. Well, I guess since almost 80% of you are saying that you don't currently audit your collection agencies, this is definitely a timely topic. We have to hold our collection agencies accountable, guys. So James has some great materials for you today. So I'll toss it back to you, James.
All right. Well, thank you. And that is that's pretty much what we found when we started to kick this this research off. Because I went out looking for a protocol that I could copy. Okay, I wanted to find something that already exists with a peer institution, something we could tweak, and I did have a hard time finding any response that provided some type of outline. What I did find that most of our peers either had one or two types of audit practice. The first one you can actually see here, it's blank. So they had nothing in place. So maybe the excuse was no time, no money, no people, therefore they didn't have an audit. So with that, the other type of audit that we found or practice in place was really focused on performance. And this is where our school fell in. Okay, we reconciled the dollars collected to the payment posted in banner. So we also looked at the collection activity as far as what's been paid in full. And using a variety of those metrics, we came together to come up with a way to determine what is the next round of placement going to be? What is the breakdown going to be? So let's say we had three main agencies that we place our first, second, and third business with every time we go out and place new accounts. So they could actually, over time, they could be rotating through. For the first couple months, one agency's doing very well, collecting the most and hitting paid in fulls. So that determined maybe the next month after that or couple months that they continue to have different slice of the pie. But that can slip. Agencies, companies, they could change that up over time. So in theory, it kind of rotates through, kind of keep your best performers performing well, or rewarding those who step up and start collecting a little bit more. But the industry has been changing with new rules and interpretations that have been coming out, and definitely those rules, and maybe it's just my opinion, but they definitely lean toward being more consumer friendly and less so of an industry friendly. So what I did find when reading comments and feedback from the industry on several articles is that agencies, these are our vendors, agencies really would like to have clear definitions and guidance on standards and best practices. So yeah, we have a lot of regulations that's coming out, a lot of interpretation, so it's not all bad, but it's still being developed over time. So every time something comes out, we pause again, we may cringe a little bit, trying to figure out what feedback do we give them, how does this impact the practices that we have in place now. And then from a creditor, we're looking at what the impact, does that change the risk or inherent risk or perceived risk that we may have that we want to dig into a little bit more on our next round of audits. So before we get into the design, I needed an education on the regulation affecting collection. As Judy noted, I handle the cashier side and customer service. I really wasn't into the collections activity. So I had to go out and get a basic understanding of the collection industry, the collection rules and regulations that affect and impact, what are the expectations out there for any collected agency, which then should definitely be something we're checking and making sure that our agencies are doing for us. So here's my high level and quick look at how we got here. So taking a step back a little bit, we go all the way back to 1930. So we had UDAP, right? The unfair, deceptive, or abusive acts or practices. Speeding on up to 1970s, we're looking at the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We're looking at the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. 1990, early 90s, I believe it was, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. And then we'll just flash forward to 2010. So, what we have happen in 2010 is the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2010. And again, these are not all inclusive. Starting way back in 1930, I just hit some high points of things that really impacted the industry over time and still have some impact on the industry, on the collection practices that we should be holding our vendors accountable for, they're holding ourselves accountable for. Should be apparent that these things are being followed. And so the history is showing increasing regulations, right? It's 1930 all the way up to 2010, and then we have some recent rulings and stuff coming out from the CFPB I'll talk about in a moment. So there's plenty of reasons out there, as you can tell from the history, that we should be doing some form of due diligence on our third-party vendors. So according to Google, that's where everybody goes for the resource today, the Great Recession started in December 2007. So I went out and I looked at the FTC Consumer Sentinel Report from 2008 through 2014. Little disclaimer of why I picked those years. Obviously, 2008 is the first full year after the Great Recession started. And I ended in 2014 and haven't updated it because I did my research and my initial project in 2015. But it shows right here. This is one of the big things. The complaints on debt collections ranked second that period, during that period of 6 years there. So right there, it tells you that this is something that happened. These are complaints that happen. These are perceived items that debtors may be calling in a complaint and making a formal filing with the FTC. But it's number 2, and it's only number 2 behind identity theft. So then from there, as I mentioned, in 2010, the Dodd-Frank. Now, the way I put this is that Dodd-Frank's, this is a power couple, and they had a baby. And they named it the CFPB, or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So it took about a year before CFPB got some organization and began to function. And one key function or power that the CFPB was granted was taking the lead on enforcement of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act and other collection-related regulations. So which prior to that fell under the FTC. And for at least the last 5 or 6 years, the CFPB has continued to issue, release many rules and interpretations that impact the collection of debt. And that's both for third party as well as the original creditors, all of their activities as well as responsibilities. And then noted in 2014 in an article, for most of you in the collection industry, Web Recon, article posted in 2012 called Managing Third-Party Risk. All right, this is exactly what we're trying to do with our audit practice. That article highlighted a key point in why we need to step up diligence on monitoring our third-party vendors. The key point is that the CFPB plans to hold original creditors, such as universities, liable for the action of their third-party collections agencies. And they're going to be held accountable for a serious violation of the applicable collection laws. So all these regulations have increased the risk associated with collection activities, especially when you're utilizing a third-party vendor. So to continue with getting feedback from the group.
Yep, we have another polling question here for you. Do you have a documented policy or procedure in place to handle consumer complaints? So it's showing that 61% of you still need to work towards having a documented policy and procedure for handling your consumer complaints. And I would really encourage that, and if you have an ombudsman's office, I would work closely with them, because handling these complaints inappropriately can be very costly for your institution. So, James, I'll hand it back to you.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a great question to see, because that's also something we should be checking, that our agencies, our third-party vendors, they also have a process in place, and we should be a part of that process, because as we're learning as things are being released and coming out, complaints, they're going to be categorized going forward, so we should understand and be checking on how is our agency recording their complaints, are they being resolved. And then I'll talk about a little bit at the end, things that we're checking to try to map things up when it comes to complaint measurements. So it's interesting to see that 61%. Again, that falls in line with some of the findings I had researching for finding a protocol. So to continue on how we got here. Well, how we got here is it really includes finding that balance, if you will, between the inherent risks and efforts it takes to mitigate those risks to an acceptable level. So, and I can't tell you what that acceptable level will be. Each of us, each creditor will have a different set of, a different parameter, different criteria, a different level of risk. So again, you have to know what that is internally, what that is, and then having that level, you're going to be able to help identify what those risks are with any vendor, but with our collection agencies in particular. So the risk, of course, risk when outsourcing any activity, and for this I say it's specifically for collection activities, you lose the connection with your customers. Okay, so losing that connection with your customers, that also puts your institution's image, reputation, that's at risk. Okay, you also lose hiring practices and also hiring the right people. You also have, you lose some control of that training practice of those people, especially new collectors. You got to make sure that you feel comfortable with the practices, the efforts, due diligence, retraining, anything that's out there with a training practice. Again, once you give that up, you can ask for those things, but if you only read it once, and that's at the time that you're looking for an RFP, that's great. You've read through it, you think you understand it from your knowledge of what collection industry for your institution, but you really haven't peeled back years after that RFP to see if what they told you 4, 5, 3 years ago is still happening or does happen. So you got to have something in place to be checking those things. Again, it's about the risk. You're identifying the risk. Another risk you have is you're putting your data outside of your institution. And every time you do that, you're putting yourself at risk. Okay, you have that data, that confidential data is going to be at risk. And we've seen enough headlines, especially in the last couple of years with data breaches, that, you know, it can be very costly. Not only in terms of money, but also in terms of, as I mentioned earlier, your image and your reputation for your institution. So you got to make sure that just because they gave you a system setup a long time ago, you got to take the time and go back and review. Are they keeping it current? Have they made changes? Is there standards that change in the industry? How do you know, what are you looking at to make sure that the data you release is still being protected? I mean, that's a risk. And as I covered through all of these, the image and the reputation for your institution is a big thing. And it could take a lot of money and years to recover if the wrong practice or continued practice or something gets really out of hand and went unchecked for a long time. That could be very costly. And if you're an institution of higher ed, that could cost you long-term with enrollment. And enrollment is what really drives, a lot of the revenue for our institutions. So it really is, we got to keep, these are the risks that we're giving up when we outsource activities. Again, it's not just about the collection industry, that's just where I'm focused today. And then also we obviously saw in that Sentinel report that that debt collection is the #2 thing that people are complaining about. That could be a variety of reasons, but we need to make sure that we're keeping these things in risk and check these risks in check. So how do we do that? What are we doing to mitigate or minimize these risks? So things that happen that help mitigate and minimize is how much of this are you doing in-house? Are you doing it all in-house? When you think about everything that you're doing in-house, how many people is it taking? What kind of labor, cost, materials, systems, and keeping those systems updated. And also, again, making sure that you have a good hiring and training practice in place. But by keeping it in-house, you do get to keep some things of your image and reputation. Okay, you're going to, maybe these are just short-term and they had a hiccup one semester, they need to, not enroll in school, so you're handling this in-house for a certain amount of time, maybe 6 months or so. You're working with them, you're making the payment, you're collecting. So all this time you're being able to manage that image and reputation. You have that, hopefully a positive contact. You're working with them on a plan. You have professional people on the phones making the collection effort for you. So you can minimize that by maybe you do the first part of the process in-house, and if you're not doing that now, that's something to look at. If you have, you know, your tolerance for image and reputation is low because of something that happened, or you pride yourself on being the #1 or flagship maybe in your system, this may be a way to help mitigate some of that risk of reputation, is keeping it in-house before sending it to a third party. So, so as I was digging up more articles, again, I found an article in 2014 for InsideArm.com, which was an article by a PR star titled "The Oversight of Third Parties: The Challenge Ahead," which this article really, you know, hit home. We already saw that we're going to be held accountable for original creditors. So this kind of helps say, with the increased scrutiny from the CFPB, the original creditors should step up their safeguards with third-party agencies by conducting ongoing risk assessments, right? And here's the language in contracts that detail responsibilities, that define critical activities, you know, measure performance, and of course you want to develop an oversight process as you go along. And as you dig back and you peel through the process of, you didn't have that audit, which a large percent of you, 80% of you do not have an audit practice in place. You're identifying these risks, and you're doing it for the first time, okay? But as you go through an audit, okay, and the next year that you do an audit, and the next year that you do an audit, that's how you're going to be making sure that you're conducting that ongoing risk assessment. And then if you're fortunate enough to have an RFP coming up, this is a good time now that you sat down and you went through hopefully an audit, or you sat down as a team and you identified some risk. Maybe this is the time that you want to rework that contract as you put it out for RF, you know, a request for proposal to, you know, to keep your vendors or to look for new vendors. Really think about the language that you're looking for, or the risk that you want to help mitigate, or put other responsibilities into that contract that make sure that you are getting specific details, that you're getting specific reports, or you're requesting certain measurements or confirmation that their systems are being tested, what those results are. If they had a finding, share with you. You know, you're their client. You have everything at risk by having everything out there. So you want to know, are their systems updated? Was there a finding that could put your data at risk? Or is there a hiring practice that should change, or laws that should change, and they should have implemented those in their practices? These are all things that you should be addressing then. And you really may not come across those things. And I've sat on RFPs where you read, you know, that 36-page document that's been written originally years and years ago, and you just kind of go through and tweak a few things. But you should step back and say, what are the risks, and then see if you can identify how you help mitigate those risks in any new contract going forward. Okay? So the other thing is that you really should be, you know, conduct a structured periodic audit. Okay, that involves testing techniques, inspecting the documents, such as agency training protocols I kind of mentioned earlier. You should be looking at this and asking them for this. What's their training protocol? How are they tracking the completion and successful training for these people? Sorry about that, they're collectors, okay? They're team members. And do they have a retraining effort? So how many times do their new people, or maybe somebody who's been there a while and has issues developed that they may not have had before, you know, are there retraining efforts? How are they documenting that? And then, of course, there's compliance activities that everybody in the collection industry should have, you know, a regular recurring refresher on these, especially for people who've been there a while. They need to be reminded. So look at their notes. You should be looking at your agency notes when they're calling on your customers. Part of what you should be doing is taking a peek at those notes, listening to recorded calls. And that's one of the fun ones, because you're listening for tone, you're listening for attitude, language, but you're also looking for, you know, are the, you know, the mini Mirandas being done properly, and especially, did they answer their phone? Did they identify themselves who answered their phone? Did they tell them, you know, that this is a call? Or did they get a recording and following the proper procedure for how to leave a message? Okay, which is all, you know, there's regulations for all these things. And yes, we can read that they do this, but if you don't take the time to listen to audio calls and see if there's a pattern of being successful in following those protocols, or did you establish a protocol that is written on paper but it's not being done in practice? And again, these are the people representing you. You're their clients, so you want to make sure that you're protecting your image and reputation by taking the time to go through these inspect these things. Okay, read the document, but you also need to do a follow-up and make sure that, can I see that this training protocol is being put to practice? And again, one of the other things you should be doing when you dig into this is you should be following payments. If there's a payment on their system, how did that come through and post to your system? For example, we have Banner, so I should be able to match it up. Obviously, it's not post, they collect tomorrow and I can see it the next day. It really is probably a month behind by the time you get your report. So all these things should be easy to verify, and they should be consistently done correctly, and you want to be able to follow those things. Important things that especially coming up in one of the new rulings and interpretations is about, the verification of the debt. So you should be, in your practice, making sure you minimize that risk by checking balances. What's in their system? Is it what's in our system? If there is a discrepancy, is it your system sending the incorrect information, delayed information, or is it really their system not posting things timely or accurately for whatever reason? So another note to help mitigate and minimize risk. So I do get stuck on this, but you need to be able to prepare to terminate a relationship before the issue is too big. And the reason I say that is that actually, since I've been here in the last couple of years, our university had dropped an agency for concerns over complaints received and practices. And you have to be able to do this. If actions or lack of correction to the behavior that being demonstrated by your vendor, again, you'll know this because you spent the time now over a couple years to dig into these things. But you got to be able to terminate. So that doesn't mean put all your eggs in one basket. Of course, having multiple vendors is a good way to ensure that you have continuation of the collection agency efforts and things like that. But you got to be able to mitigate that risk and minimize it. You identify something, they don't correct it, they do it again, they don't correct it. Whatever your risk tolerance is but at the end of it, you got to be able to pull the trigger and say, this is where it has to stop, and you have to terminate that contract. And that may be something you have to put in the language of the contract a little bit better to spell out those expectations of what could happen. Most of them have some type of language in there, but again, if you haven't gone back and really read that, that's a good time to do that because you're identifying the risk and assessing your tolerance for it. So that was my soapbox. So I did get on risk and how to mitigate some of those risks and some of the activities that you should be doing in your audit process. These are things that I experienced, that I learned along the way. And that wraps up my high-level overview of how we got here. So we looked at the laws that go back for years, go back to at least the 1930s. Moving us forward, we'll see that those things still impact our activities and things that we do today and should be doing and what the responsibilities are of a collection agencies. And it's clear, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's clear, my opinion is that the CFPB leans consumer-friendly. And with creditors on the hook for third-party actions, we need to have some form of system in place to monitor. So at this point, we're just going to, we'll go ahead and jump into the initial review. And as with any audit, you need to determine an adequate sample size. So here's what happened at first. So as I said, this was part of my capstone project, and it was to test my research proposition, which was, again, as accounts get older, are they harder to collect? And if they're harder to collect, are tactics being changed? And when that happens, is there a higher risk? Because maybe the caller or the debtor is being more adamant or being more evasive, whatever the proper term that we want to use here, and maybe the collector's having one of those bad days, or maybe this is an agency norm and they are aggressive and they're using language or they're using tactics and things they should be using. So that was my proposition, is as things move from first, second, and third placement, would we find more activity the older it got? or more findings of inappropriate behavior or discrepancies. So what I did here, what you see on the screen, these are everything that we looked at. A total of 929 accounts spread out between first, second, and third placement. The way to break down is shown on your screen. So we currently have 3 agencies at the time of this review or this first size audit. And what I had to do is I really needed to find, to get a protocol in place. And to do that, I had to get a good understanding of the activities across all 3 agencies to see if activities different between, like I said, the first, second, and third placement. And then out of that 929, I had to come up with my sample size. And I did that by using an online tool called Macor Research Solution Sample Size Calculator. And then with that, if you ever go out and seen it or used it before, maybe you have a lot more math than I do, you simply plug in your total population, and you got to plug in a confidence level and a confidence interval. Those were handed to us for our project, which is 95% confidence level, 5% interval. Please don't ask me the technical questions regarding those 2 things. Again, I just used what was provided for me in my paper. So I wanted to get the best population. So we went with 95 and we went with 5, and I had to do it for each bucket. So if you just take 929 and you plug that in, you're going to have a much smaller number when you use the 95% and the 5%. But I did it by each bucket. So I plugged in 534 and got my sample size. I plugged in 241, et cetera, to get my sample size, because I really needed to get the best percentage for all of those to find out, I needed a good representation of the activity, because this was the first time of really digging in. This was a learning experience for me, and we had to get a real solid baseline of what activities happen and what we should be looking for. Once I got those numbers, I placed those numbers into just a random, I just used the Excel random number generator, and then I put them in ascending order, and I picked my population out of the. That's how I got it. So I used the sample calculator, and then I took the 534 accounts, threw them all in by agency, and then I just determined by using the Excel function of random number generator to determine which accounts I will actually drill down on. And then that took me to actually digging. I had to dig in. I had to dig into all those accounts. So this is kind of, again, things have changed, but this is my initial sample of how I did some tracking. Now the first 3 columns that would be on your left are gone. So I would have had the first name, last name, and we call it a university ID number. All those are redacted for this purposes. And again, this was just a small section. So I had hundreds of accounts that I had to go through. 482 is what I had to go through. So I did this for each agency, and I did it for each placement within that agency. So looking at things that I was looking for, and I'll cover where those things come from later, but looking for when did we send it, when did they actually put it in their system, okay? We did notice there was a discrepancy in that process, and we figured that out, worked with our system people and contacted one of the agencies to work through a discussion on that. So things that should have been happening based on what they do in their RFP, what they said their scope was. So all these activities, most of their skip tracing is automated. When was their initial contact? When is the letter, the validation letter sent? And as I noted earlier, did they get a payment? So we want to know, did the account show a payment? And we want to make sure that if their records show a payment, we should be able to take that and find it in Banner. Again, these are, month, 2 month, 3 month behind by the time we're going out and reviewing these accounts. So we should be able to follow those in there. Also, was the account closed? Was it a bankruptcy, a do not contact, deceased? Because there are certain rules, regulations that go with each of those. So we're looking for any of those type of activities, accounts that we need to pull out and examine a little bit more. As you dig through there, did you notice anything of their language that maybe indicated that the caller was upset? Maybe they logged a complaint or some type of language in their details that say, was there a complaint log? And then the last column here is a big one. It's about the time call. So this was also one of my learning curves. The FDCPA, the Fair Debt Collection Practice, indicates what is appropriate time to call. So when you're working on this part of it, you really have to look at where is your debtor living, where is the agency at, and is there a time difference between, maybe you have just easy math here, you have an East Coast vendor agency working for you, and it shows 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or 7 o'clock in the morning. Actually, I kind of did that backward, but you have to follow the time zone. It's like, so here where it might have said there's a 1, that indicates, well, I think there's a difference in the time. So this was just my tracking sheet. On here and to the left, I had additional notes, but the 1 indicated, based on the address and the time, I think there's something I need to look at. Okay, so that's how I just tracked everything through here. So the ones you see were all, I did the date mapped up. I see that there's gift tracing. I see that there's ongoing gift tracing. It says a letter was validated, or one shows that there was a payment, and then I followed it through saying, yes, it was in, the payment was on the account. So the ones indicate something to me that, yes, I should have found it, or like in the last column, I found something and I need to spend a little more time on it. So, I did that for 482 accounts. So I did have a learning curve. So with that,
Okay.
Judy's got another question?
I do have another question. This is a multiple choice. So at this point, we're interested, do you do any of the following? Do you take the time to listen to some collection calls? Do you review invoices? Do you verify accuracy of payment applications? So thanks, everyone. We have some interesting numbers here. While a large percentage of you are reviewing your invoices and payment applications, not very many of you are listening to collection calls. And as James mentioned, that's really an important part of how you monitor your agencies, is hearing how they speak to your debtors, the tone, are they following protocol. So definitely would encourage you to do that at least once a year. So, back to you, James.
Okay. Thank you guys for sharing that information and being honest about what you're doing. Since I can't interact with you a lot, I see those last 2 answers being scored really high. So I kind of relate that to what we were doing back into, okay, there's a group that does nothing, and then there's a group that spent time on the numbers, on the dollars, and making sure that those match up. So that kind of fits in line with you weren't doing anything, or you were doing this. So I hope I interpret that correctly, but I'd like to hear more from you after this session if you have time to reach out. So as I said, if you're seeing this for the first time, or maybe you work with your agencies a little bit, here's an example. One of the systems used, actually I think at least 2 of our vendors use the same system. So here's what it kind of looks like. This is the activity. So I had no experience. I wasn't working with our internal collections and being that liaison with our external collectors if they needed to verify information, etc. So as you see here, there's a lot of things that this tells you. You talked about the skip. Okay, so you see that there's a whole bunch of alphabets here, right? A GEB, an SVC, a CTG. Okay, so yes, when you're into the system and you're learning these things, I did find that every system has a small column, usually somewhere, maybe on the left-hand side, and it was a really small tab that says cheat sheet kind of thing. This tells you about the codes, but there's different codes. So the CUAC that you may see on there, the BKCC, the SN36. I mean, there's different cheat sheets that tell you and indicate what each of those numbers mean. So here we can see that we have somebody who received a voice message, right? Okay, so we see that they sent out the validation letter. So you see that they started their skip process. What I don't probably show on here at the very beginning, so I wanted to match up. Okay, so if we sent the file on the 2nd, is the 2nd, March 2nd, the date that they actually started doing the process and due diligence that they said that they were going to be doing within X amount of time. So I'm matching these things up. I know when we sent the file, I see that they received it. I see that they're putting it, putting it to work. Validation letters, that you guys know, is a very important part of the collection process we use in third-party agencies. And then you start looking through this activity. You're looking for, okay, if they left a message, if they say they actually talked to them, did they indicate that they did their MMR, their mini Miranda? So you're checking for all these things. And not only are you seeing it, but that's why, like she said, if you listen to those calls, a good sample of those calls, you're kind of matching these up. Okay,
James?
yes, they identify, yes.
Yes. One of the questions we just received, and that's why I broke in here, is how do we know your agency won't just send you good call scripts? You want to talk about selecting a sample and how we tell the agencies what calls we want to hear?
Okay, yes, that's a great question. So I'll answer that, but here I'll show you here. So learning curve, when I first started reading this, it should have just looked like this. I mean, it wasn't the same to me. I work for higher ed, and I'm not used to all the acronyms. So it should have been just written in characters and things like this on the right. So going back to listening to the calls, yeah, so your agency does not know what population you're choosing, and out of that population, like I said, I picked 929 accounts, and those were placed with agencies from December of 14 through February of 15. That's 929 total during that time. And then out of that, I randomly selected, and out of that population, I also requested phone calls for those specific. And that is something that you'll learn. You'll learn, like, okay, I need to hear all recordings with all these customers going forward. Any call that you had with the debtor, whether it's a hang-up or whether it's a message or anything, because, again, you're checking for all these facts. So you're asking for all the audio files. And that is one of the things that could take them a while to do, to get that to you. But they don't know what you're collecting for. You are going to be listening to a random population. And then I even had some that, being on the side that I was used to be on, which is the customer service side, I would say, hey, I think these 3 calls, I don't know if I agree with what he was saying to the customer, or did he have an attitude? Of course, maybe the debtor had the attitude as well. And then I sent it up to, to other people I had on my audit team, which I talk about a little bit later. But those were people that were in the collection side of us, and then I had them review those calls before I said anything back to the agency. So how do you know? You request everything, and you do hope that when they are listening to those calls to forward them to you, that they are truly sending you all those contacts. And then, again, you're matching these things up. You can hear, well, out of this customer, I already reviewed the details. I should see that they left a voice message on 4/23/15 for this customer. Okay, so they should have logged those contacts, and you can tell, like, hey, maybe I'm missing one. It's like, I got this one and this one for this customer, but on your details, your collector, your representative said they also talked to the debtor on this day. I need that phone call. And again, that's why being exposed to both the detail side and the audio side, you're going to map things up, and you're going to be able to see if you missed anything, or if not saying it's intentional, but that's why we do this. We need to keep them, keep our agencies, because it's our reputation, it's our image. We need to keep that in check and have it monitored. So I hope that answered that question. I do get enthusiastic about these things because this is something I lived on for over a year and I continue to do. So thank you for that question. So, so as I said, the details are great information, and as you're learning and digging into this, you know, what you see on the right, that it's okay. That's how it looked to me. I asked a lot of questions with pretty much all of my contact with the 3 agencies, as well as internally with the associate and assistant director of collections and student loans, just to make sure that, you know, I'm getting a good foundation. I'm that independent person, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of come up with this. One, I like auditing. It's something I wanted to focus on during my master's, and also worked on to get my certified fraud examiner. So you need some sense of that person who's reviewing it. It shouldn't be somebody who's always in contact with your agency. It shouldn't be your point person that is looking at this, and it really should have somebody in your institution, in your lineup, that can be somewhat of an independent, okay? They still have to reach out to them and probably get past their learning curve, but each year they're going to have a better foundation, and they can start changing things up. Okay, last year we focused on this. This year we're going to add this, or we're going to be more diligent in maybe something else that you want to peel back on. So, now that you heard that great stuff and kind of what I went through, my tribulations to get here, I'll kind of go through the planning overview. So these are all the things that hopefully you heard up to date, but just to highlight them in some type of sequence that you can relate. So you're going to start out, and unless you've been doing this, which most of you told me that you don't, right, you're going to be, whoever's going to do this for you is going to be doing research, okay? Now, my research, because it also was a research paper and a project and a presentation for my class, it took me into, I definitely had to focus on literature. So I really peeled back and looked at as many laws as I could find, as many as the recent articles, especially since the CFPB baby was born in 2010, and things that change. And then we got to make sure we have objectives, okay? What did USFSEO, what does your institution want to accomplish, okay? What level of assurance are you looking at for your agencies, okay? What do you want to accomplish with this? And it has to be adequate, and you need to follow, you know, follow the regulations, and there's also contractual obligation for your agencies as well as yourself, so there's 2 to that party. You need to look at the roles, all right? So the roles is, as I just mentioned, a key role I wanted to highlight was about having some type of independence in that auditor spot, okay? It shouldn't be the person who's meeting quarterly with them. You know, our lead person is going to go to all the collection conferences or you know, customer appreciation or things like that. You really should have somebody that's not participating in all those roles or in those contacts. You need to have that some type of independence. But also on the other hand, you still need to have those people on your team because they're more the experts while you're just starting out, or whoever you place in this. They're the experts you're going to refer to before you say something back to the agency and you could be incorrect. Again, this is a learning experience, especially when you kick this off. So, and then who else in your organization? You know, is there somebody else in your organization, your chain of command, your org chart, or is there also somebody at your institution that you should include? And I'll tell you who we used in just a moment. Then you have to conduct the audit, right? I think I kind of went through several of the steps. When you conduct those audits, you're matching things up. You're reviewing documents. You are listening to documents. You are inspecting the details on their account. You're matching those things up. You're following those payments through, making sure that what they say did happen actually did happen. And again, it's not just with this audit, it's with any audit, that you're trying to conduct enough reviews, enough document that you have some type of assurance that feels like, okay, we have our risk, it's in our tolerance zone, everything's under control. We will just continue to monitor. Now, as you conduct the audit, there's obviously going to be a follow-up. Okay, so the good news is you kind of get through all of this, and your follow-up to the agency is just, hey, we conducted our review or audit, and no material findings, you kind of wrap it up, say thank you, we'll catch you next year, or will we? Just keep it a surprise, right? So you have to follow up. But the other side is when you think you found something that doesn't match to what you read, to what you heard, to what you followed through or traced through a transaction, you follow up, and like I said, you're going to start with probably your experts internally, and then you may need to follow up with your agencies. For example, I noted way back earlier that some of the immaterial findings we had were about the certificate of insurance. Now, I used, an internal expert with the university to help investigate that and followed up with them. They told me how to follow up with the agency. So follow-up is a key important part. Then once you get through all the follow-up, and hopefully after that initial follow-up you need more details, then you send them the great congratulations, we're done for this year. And then you need to report out. A report out is a very important process. It needs to go up your chain of command, up your organization, because this is what helps going to document that, hey, we are on the right path. We recognize that there's risk out there in the collection, on the collection side of what we do as a creditor, as the institution. So you want to report this out, and you want to make sure that you have it documented of all the things that you found, anything that you asked for that was corrected, and that kind of sets that document that, hey, we took time, we did some due diligence, and we have corrective actions in place. That report out will also be something that you're going to use for next time to continue on. Maybe you found like certificate of insurance. You definitely bet next year I will be hitting that up again. Okay, because things change at your vendor. They go out and maybe get new business. Some of the language doesn't transfer over appropriately, because at least in our contract with the University of Illinois, and for the state of Illinois actually, agencies, we have specific language that's supposed to be on there, and we need to make sure that it's on there. There's certain limits that need to be stated for several of those categories, so those have to be checked. Since I had a finding this time, you bet that's probably going to be an area I will focus on next time, just to keep them in checks and balance. And then the last thing is you really have to update your protocol. This isn't once and done. This isn't, hey, it worked last year. This is, hey, last year we learned something. What did we learn? You should be documenting those things. And on your report out, I would always recommend that you have a recommendation section at the end. Say next year, this is what we're going to do. We're going to maybe focus on this or things like that. So I touched on some of those things that we set our initial audit did recommendations for. So you need to update that protocol. That protocol is not set for the future. Things will change, and you should be adapting that protocol to match that those change in risk. So again, soapbox, this is one of my fun areas that I think I get to do here for the university. So I'm planning to turn into actions, right? So to get started, kind of put it in different words of what we said. You're going to be looking for your audit team. You're going to look for those resources. For example, risk management. That's who I reached out to when it came to the certificate of insurance, for example. Are the limits correct? Is the verbiage correct? She responded back to me. I had to go back to the agency a couple times to get things corrected and in the right spots. Okay. Also, if the contract with an agency, but there's a parent company, you need to make sure that you can tie all these things together or make sure that it's edited appropriately and make sure they're properly covered. Of course, I always say besides just internally, like I used our assistant associate director, our senior director, our systems people, our resources internally, but accounting in general, because that's an outside function from our office. You know, if you need to use them, you know, you want to make sure that certainly you have a conversation, you have a relationship with somebody from that unit and from that team. So then, as you build through, you want to know what you're going to audit, right? So you're continuing to look at where do we start. So a place that we started, as I kind of hinted earlier, with all those columns of what we were looking for, a lot of those came out of the contract itself, and I focused on the scope of services section. So there was contractual obligations and requirements, okay? And I focused on those activities, and then the other activities that come out of there is that the certificate of insurance, the licensing, okay? If we asked for it in the RFP, it had to have been important. And if they responded saying that these are the licensing certificates, well, Are they keeping them updated? Is there anything that you need to do to follow those up? Security policies, all right? Again, that's probably a key thing that you're looking for. And if you're not that tech person, somebody needs to review that for you, okay? What is their security policy? Because your data, as I mentioned earlier, your confidential data is at risk. So what are they doing to protect it? What safeguards do they have in place? What physical and system safeguards do they have in place? Okay. Other things is the annual attestation audit, the SOX audit. You know, we received those for a few years, but we were just like the conduit. It's like the agency is our customer, is our relationship. So we would ask for it, and then we would pass it on to the people who wanted it within the university. But now we should be taking a look at that because, again, are there systems in place? Were there any concerns? Hopefully the end user of that, when you requested and passed along, would have questions and follow up. But again, if you're the relationship primary creditor, if you will, unit of the university, you should be taking some time, and somebody on your team should have the knowledge to be able to read through that and see if there's anything that jumps out or that's glaring as a risk that needs to be addressed. So other things that are in this contract. So what are their obligations? What do they tell you about how fast they're going to pay you? Okay, and are they doing it? Okay, how long are they keeping their written records? That's probably in your contract with them. Okay, like how soon are they going to start activities? Like I mentioned earlier when I saw that detail. In our contract, we're looking for, within a certain amount of time, they said they would receive it and begin to due diligence, skip tracing, etc. So again, how did I get what I was going to look for and making sure that they're keeping their obligations? So it come out of the scope of service part of the contract, okay? You're reconciling your portfolio every month. You know, what are they doing? What are you doing? Data security, as I mentioned. And of course, I go back to this attestation, the SOX 1 report, SOX 2 report. You should, if you're getting it and passing it on, you probably should take a little time, make a copy for yourself, and review it. Make sure that there's no weaknesses in there, of course, that you need to address, as I said. So hopefully here, you kind of get a feel for how I did the research, how we got started to build our foundation. You kind of go through the steps of researching, building your team, right? You need to conduct an audit. What are the things that you're doing in that audit? I covered a lot of those points, listening to phone calls, reading the documents, etc. And then I showed you a sample of what it looks like. So if this is your first time looking at it, congratulations, you're a little bit ahead than where I started originally. So now the next section here is I'll just outline kind of like again, this is a little out of whack because I documented it as I went along and I left it that way. If you say, well, why would you do that before this? It's just to show you that all of us have a learning curve or where we start with this. So just hopefully that you take away a nugget or two and you're going to do this. So you need to draft letters to the agencies, okay? You need to make sure that whoever is doing your audit actually has access to the client portals. Somebody within your organization probably has like an admin and can set you up. Some of the agencies you may have to request, you know, somebody needs to request for you and you get set up and it's sent back to you. And then who's the contact, okay? Because you need to initiate that initial, you know, you draft your letter, you're going to send it out. The other people are involved in the process. They can help you tweak the message and things like that, but you should be that primary person, again, having that layer of independence. You need to determine that sample population. So again, this looks a little out of whack, but there's things that I thought would take longer to get in place, like access, things like that. Then, of course, when you're going to send out for the information, you're going to send that letter out to them because you have your population now. You tell them what to respond with. And then the hard part, it really is reviewing all the material. So maybe you're only going to do one agency at a time. That probably wouldn't be a bad idea. You stretch it out over, you know, a couple months throughout the year. I did all three at once. So all the information came in a day or two apart. So it took me a little while to separate out. Okay, I got my daily job, now I got this new project, and you got to review the material. You really got to dig in, you got to make the time to go through that material. Okay, and as I said earlier, you review the material, you make your notes, You're documenting as you go along. Here's something we asked for. This is what we received. This is what we found. But you found something that needs to be followed up. You need to follow up with the agency. And you need to be making your notes along the way, because this is what the information that's going to end up in that report out that you do. Okay, you're creating this working document as you go along and documenting what you found. Again, because this is the resource you're going to be using to springboard your next audit. And again, as I mentioned, so now you're reporting out to the audit team. You're going to report out to the agency. Again, the step is to review. What did you do? What went well, right? And what do we need to adjust? So these are some great steps. They're not necessarily in order, but so now you have an outline, hopefully, like, oh yeah, we need to get a letter. We need to make sure we have access and things like that. So, and maybe you have that first person say, hey, we're going to be starting this new audit procedure. James is going to be in charge of it. You'll receive communication from him, etc. So working through some steps. Hopefully this gives you an outline of what to do. So here is kind of a high-level overview of what our annual protocol looks like. And it's annual, so, you know, is it the same time every year, time area? Sure. You should be using different accounts because you should have fresh stuff that you're looking at as you go through. So kind of what we're going with for next time, and now that I've probably presented this, I'll have to change it. But, you know, each agency, maybe we're going to select 30 to 40 accounts. And again, I could do that and feel comfortable because I did 482 accounts my first time around. I have findings, I have things I'm comfortable with, I have things I need to dig on, okay? But validation letter, that's a huge thing. Again, it's coming out in some new rulings that's coming out from the CFPB, so you need to make sure that validation letters still meet the requirements that if they're making some changes for. You need to request those audio files. You request those all at the same time. Another thing that was in the service scope of services was documentation of non-phone activities. I didn't do it the first time around, but I definitely need to implement that in the second, because as you're digging through things, you're trying to figure out, okay, are there complaints, is there follow-ups, is there any other documentation that's not listed in their details for some reason? Not saying, again, it's an issue, but as you dig through these things, you realize you should try to get all the data, all the material from your agency for each account. Account balance, obviously, you're going to be checking that. That's a huge thing. Validation of debt, etc. We're going to continue to look for certificates and licensing because I have a list now that I know what's coming due next year. Maybe I don't ask for all of them. Maybe I say I want to see a copy of this now and not just a listing of everything. So you can be specific or as broad as possible. But again, knowing I have last year behind me, I can be pretty diligent and say, okay, I want these. Another thing I learned about this year, and at least with one of the agencies, I think it's an industry practice, is there's a compliance system. So how are they testing it? Can you get proof of testing it? It's things like that. Policy, training, all that stuff, as I mentioned earlier. And then we talk about getting into invoices and reviewing those. And then site visit. If somebody is going to the site, try to piece some things together that you would like them to look at if you can't be that one that goes out to do it. Site visits are important to sights and sounds and activity going on in the office. They should match with what you read and what you've done. Here's another example of what we did. We said it was going to be quarterly. I noted earlier that, so I did 2 quarterly ones. The results and what I could find, we're going to change this to a semi-annually. We're going to be looking at complaints, asking for the internal log, checking the BBB, checking the CFPB. They have the CFPB has a huge database. Things are general and generic sometimes because they redact the institution, things like that. But you should be reading these things. Is there a history? Is there a common practice? Because then you have a feeling for what did the BBB get as far as complaints? Are you seeing this or hearing these things in your audio, in your notes, and things like that? So while it may not be specific to your debtor, it gives you that sense of how many complaints are there on yours, on your agency you're working with, and what do you need to draw from that to make it, okay, we need to dig in on this and hone on this for this next round of audit. And those are very important things that you need to do. Again, since I didn't find anything, we moved it forward. So one of the other things that I just completed actually was a commission review of the invoices. On your contract, everything is spelled out, right? How much is first, second, and third rates, okay? And again, I'll go through the same thing. For this one, I did a systematic sampling method, which I just used every 15th or the last one on the page. I mapped the debtor. What payment did they say they had on the invoice? I made sure that payment was in Banner. I came up with a spreadsheet on the right. I'm not saying that this is something that you definitely want to use. It's just something that I did. So for UIN, obviously I redacted those. $13 payment, 23% that I could trace. Should have been a $2.99, and then I confirmed on the invoice that it was $2.99. So it just works on down the system here. Now you see this negative activity here. I think that was where a payment was actually reversed because the check was bad, or maybe an NSF activity. And that still should be things that you should be able to trace. You know, because they paid you, they paid the agency, you followed it through, they took their commission, but within that next billing cycle, that item came back. So you should also be able to trace that these activities happen, and you should match them up. You know, you have a simple spreadsheet to help you do the math. You're going through and you're visualizing the payment, and you're confirming the amounts. So again, may not be the best one, but this is what I started with this first time around to see if I can tweak it going forward. Hope this is a nugget that one of you can take forward. So the next couple of things, we're wrapping this up here on the things that on this process. I am sharing with everybody sample letters. This is not our original one, and I think it definitely will probably be, not definitely, but probably will be tweaked by the time I sit down and send it for the next one. But here's a sample telling the agency that we are conducting an audit and what we're going to be looking for. So this one here, I think, was for our, yeah, so as you can see here, the first letter had 12 things, so we definitely condensed it. So we're looking for the attestation audit. We're looking for their complaint logs. How are they solving those? What's their resolution status on those? Contact compliance system test probably. And then also for the spreadsheet, we attached a list of accounts, 30, 40 accounts, and we want the validation letter, we want all the audio files, and we want all non-phone activity. Okay, so these are things, this is kind of the outline of what I'll be using when I kick off my next round of audits. This is a sample of what we kind of drafted when we requested for third-party their internal complaint logs. So when I went through, and for the first quarter here, I think you can see it's like, hey, I need your complaint logs, and hopefully you can just send me a report that are debtors. Okay, that, you know, that really shrinks it down, hopefully. But again, it's just a sample letter, kind of put some dates out there when we send it, what the expectations are. And then as you can see here, I'm a contact, but also so is the, you know, the main associate director for collections. So that kind of wraps up my overview. Again, I hope you take some nuggets from this, and if you have any questions, you can contact me. So I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, James, that was incredibly informative, and I appreciate all of the work that went into it on your end. And having been on the business end of one of the University of Illinois audits, I know that it's incredibly thorough. And speaking of that, I just wanted to take a moment to discuss the importance of partnership between colleges and universities and their collection agencies. This obviously is near and dear to my heart, as I am the Director of Client Services here, but more importantly, the partnership and the relationship you have with your agencies and that they have with you is the biggest indicator as to how your audits are going to go. It's important that you have a strong relationship with your key contacts at your collection agencies, the management team, and that you're aware of who they are, and that you're coordinating with them on a regular basis to ensure that things are going well, and that you are conducting, you know, your audit could be smaller or could be bigger than what James just described. But the important part of this is that you're partnering with your agency, sharing information, because we represent you. And as James discussed very clearly throughout his conversation with you, we represent the school, and if we show poor customer service to your students, that's a missed opportunity for us on your behalf, and it's also a potential missed opportunity for you if that student decides not to come back to the university in the future should they want to complete their degree or go on to an advanced program. So I think that partnership is important, working together, communicating on a regular basis, setting up a monthly or quarterly conference call just to touch base on operational and administrative issues is something that I highly recommend. I think it's an opportunity, again, to touch base, keep in contact, and then annually or however often you do decide to do an audit, it becomes a very simple process where everyone understands each other, is familiar with it, and you get the opportunity to calibrate your approach not only to your students and each other, but also the regulatory agencies that exist that are a part of our day-to-day.
Thanks, Tom. We now have one last question for you. And what we would like to hear from you is, do you feel you now have the tools necessary to help you get started on agency audits? So the majority of you definitely felt that James gave you some great tools today. There's a few of you that I think need some more information, and we'll flip next to the resource slide. And James, you can speak to that, but after that we have James's contact information, and I know if you have additional questions after the call, he'll be more than happy to answer those for you. But James, you want to speak to your resources real quick?
Yeah, this is some of the articles I mentioned and the information that you can tell who are behind the information in those articles. McKinsey working papers on risk, you know, Web Recon, and then the Inside ARM. Those are all, you know, those are all reputable resources. So, you know, they're reporting out what they're finding and what they're doing for audits of their clients. So it's very important that we do stay on top of what's coming out, what's the latest, and understand the history of where these shifts have come from. So, hey
James, is your paper available for people to read?
No.
No?
No. The presentation has come a long way from when I did the paper for class. So yeah,
okay.
I did pass. I did a fantastic presentation. So, but I'll answer any other questions that you may have about what we went through to get there, my enthusiasm I have for the process.
Well, and I will say that in the handout section on the webinar today, there is the PowerPoint presentation of what James just did. So right. You can certainly pull that down right away. And the recording of this, as I said earlier, will be up by the end of next week.
So let's move on to some questions that we've gotten during the webinar. And the first one is, James, now that you've given the schools the foundation that you use at the University of Illinois to do your audits, what are some of the significant challenges you think schools face when they first take this on?
Okay, thank you for the question. Really, as I mentioned throughout, I say some of the biggest challenge is going to be all the changes that could be coming in regulations and interpretations, especially, you know, from the CFPB. And the one example I would highlight is that some of the stuff I kept referring to is that we're seeing is that there was a recent CFPB advanced notice of proposed rulemaking. I think they abbreviated it like an ANPR, and it's regarding the potential changes on the number of contacts per debtor and per week. So that definitely, if that becomes, right now I feel it was in the comment period and then they reported out on that. I don't think it's been implemented yet. But if they implement those things, you know, in future audits, you definitely need to keep up with those things because now there's adding a new risk. If they are contacting excessively, now they're, you know, some of those rules we talked about earlier that would still take effect today, you know, they're going to be violating those things, especially, you know, the contact, the telephone, the TCPA will probably continue to be an important one when they make the change of the debtor contact. So that's just one example, and of course each university will have to determine what their acceptable level of risk is. Do they even want to dig down to that and count the contacts when they're going through their audit process with the sample population that's selected? But those changes right there could make it, and there's other things in that ANPR that could have an impact. So you need to read those, stay up on those, and implement those every year that there are changes.
Okay, thank you. Another question, which is one I thought, James, you and I had talked about, is when you're doing these audits, do you recommend that you even maybe interview a few of your debtors on their experience?
That is something that as you learn, you go through the process and you hear the phone calls. You do have to be selective and careful where to go to those, and depending on how that contact went and what action may have come of that. But that could definitely be something that if you feel you wanted to take that extra step and have a little bit more assurance on, maybe you heard it one way, but the perception was really different. It wouldn't hurt to have that perspective when you do those future audits when you're listening to audio files.
Great, thanks. Another question we have for you is, a lot of the large schools do work with multiple agencies, 3, 4, 5 agencies. What do you recommend the audit cycle be on the agencies?
Well, just because it's something I like to do, and how you think about financials are audited every year, and actually for multiple, for large corporations, they're done on a much smaller cycle. So annually, biannually is the farthest I would go out. It depends on how much resources and time you have to get to dedicate to this. But if you do that first one and you definitely don't feel comfortable, you shouldn't go into it and say, we're only going to do this every 2 years. Because if you found something, you should be going back, at another cycle within, before 2 years. Maybe it's only 6 months down the road. But at least a year, you should be making sure that you are feeling safe and make sure that it's your agency responded to. These are the things we have in place for those corrective actions. And you want to make sure that they're doing them. Because 2 years out, that could create a lot of headache for you, and it could damage your reputation in between that time. So, of course, I would say annually, biannually, because some of the things that we may do here internally with some of our departments is the longest I really want to go. Because people change, collectors change, even though your vendor name may stay the same, but the people making those phone calls could be different through those times, and you want to stay on top of that.
Hey, James. Would you, coming from the collection agency side, we're kind of always under audit to one extent or another, whether it be state audits or regulators or different clients. But for the university, I would think that this is obviously, much to your point, much more of an annual process. Would you stagger across agencies and do one this quarter and one next quarter, or would you do it all at once?
Well, since I'm the, again, it depends on your resource. It probably works well for somebody, to stagger it out, say we can focus on this agency for this quarter. But if you're touching them every year because that's what you want to do, then, maybe it doesn't bog them down for a whole month because you asked everybody to send it in at once. So it really is up to it's up to each individual unit or institution and what resources they have. I did all of it, except for, like I said, when I had to reach out to experts or put it with my committee. And it did take me a while to get through 3 of them coming in all at once. But again, I think because how my schedule is and what I get, I know I can request stuff here, and then maybe a month later, when I say it's due, I know that month is when I can usually take the time on a daily basis and peel through each question and stuff for the agency. Because one of the things that you get by doing them together, I'll throw this out there, is that if you do them all together and you find something in one, now you're going to be more alert for the other one. Especially, if you're taking notes and stuff, that's great. But if you're just doing one quarter here, 3 months later do another one, you may not be remembering those things that you're keying in on.
So if you do them all at once, it becomes a comparison, whereas if you spread them out, it's just an individual review.
Yeah, that could be, yeah, that's, I think, would be one of the benefits by doing them all together.
Another question we have is how often should you be communicating with your agency? And I can weigh in on this one. You should be talking with your agency at least once a month, especially when it's a new agency and you're gaining your bearings with them and you're building that relationship. If you don't hear from them, you know, there's no reason you can't reach out to them. And for your first couple of years, I would set up a recurring call with your sales representative or your customer service representative, whoever your primary point of contact is, and in some cases, once a year, engage their boss. But really be sure that you have an open line of communication with any servicer you're using, be it a loan servicer, a collection agency, your payment plan provider. That's a really important part of managing any of these contracts. James, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you gave a great response to that.
Yeah. Well, James, I want to thank you so much for doing this today. It's greatly appreciated. And look forward to seeing how you continue to enhance the protocol at the University of Illinois over time. So I'm going to turn it back to Tom to do some closing remarks. Oh, but one thing, as I continue to work with Chrissy Morales here on content for webinars, when you do the survey that Tom's going to talk about, please be sure on the survey you let us know if there's some topics that you really want to hear about in the next few months, because we're starting to reach out to people and build the content. So either send it in a question, the board is open right now, or put it on the survey, or send a question, send a comment to Tom, and he'll get it to us as we develop content. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today, and you're on, Tom.
Absolutely, everybody. There'll be a survey in just a moment. You can go ahead and go through that and take care of that. And we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. As Judy said, any ideas or content ideas you have going forward, please submit them to us. We'd be happy to entertain those as possible options as we go forward. Again, this will be available on our website by the end of next week, so you can pull that down. And there is a GoToWebinar app that we have tested, and it works really well, and it's something you can use going forward if you would like. Thank you again. Please let us know if you have any questions.